They vanished without a trace, 22 soldiers swallowed by the forests of the Ardennes. No radio, no orders, no graves. But decades later, whispers emerged of a battalion that wore the enemy's skin, sabotaged from within, and rewrote the rules of survival. What really happened in that frozen silence, and why did no one ever speak of it? The first flakes of snow began to fall on December 18, 1944, as Lieutenant Samuel Granger peered through his fogged binoculars deep into the misty Ardennes forest. The trees stood like silent sentinels, hiding death behind every trunk. Granger's unit, the 502nd Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division, had just received orders to push east in support of Bastogne. But within hours, those orders would lead them into a trap, cut off from Allied forces, left to fend for themselves in a frozen hell. What became known in whispers as the Lost Battalion was never officially recorded in Army dispatches. 22 men from the 502nd disappeared without a trace. It wasn't until decades later, through recovered journals, German records, and interviews with aging villagers, that fragments of their story emerged, revealing an extraordinary saga of survival, deception, and sabotage. The battalion's ordeal began when German panzer divisions, under the command of General Otto von Manschafel, surged unexpectedly through the Ardennes in a massive counteroffensive, the Battle of the Bulge. Granger's unit was among those caught in the initial chaos. Communications failed. Maps were useless in the snowy terrain. Within 12 hours, they were completely encircled, their radio destroyed by artillery fire. Granger, a schoolteacher before the war, realized they couldn't retreat west without encountering more enemy armor. Their only hope was to go deeper into German-held territory, an insane notion on paper, but a stroke of mad brilliance in execution. After capturing a German forward outpost under the cover of darkness, the battalion stripped the dead of their Waffen-SS uniforms and panzer crews of their gear. With an ill-gotten Tiger tank and 2 half-tracks, they became something else entirely, ghosts in enemy skin. The disguise worked. For 2 days, they moved through enemy lines by mimicking German patrols. Corporal Ray Santiago, fluent in German thanks to a grandmother in Frankfurt, became the voice of their survival. He barked commands, bluffed checkpoints, even saluted an actual Wehrmacht colonel once with perfect protocol. They were not simply evading detection, they were hunting. Granger devised a plan: sabotage supply routes feeding the front and link up with Belgian partisans rumored to operate in the nearby town of Vielsalm. In a cellar beneath a burned-out chapel, the 502nd met the leader of the local maquis, a one-eyed priest named Father Lucien. He had lost his faith, he said, the day he watched German soldiers shoot a boy for stealing bread. But when Granger and his men showed up dressed as Nazis but bearing Allied codebooks, he saw divine irony in their arrival. The partisans provided food, intel, and shelter. In return, the Americans helped destroy a fuel convoy headed toward the German front line, derailing the momentum of Kampfgruppier's advance by 2 critical days. The battalion became phantoms in the woods. By day, they hid in abandoned farms and caves. By night, they planted mines, cut communication wires, and ambushed isolated units. A captured radio allowed them to listen in on enemy chatter. One night, they intercepted word of an SS retaliation operation. Granger made the impossible decision: they would divide. One half would stay behind to draw enemy fire, while the rest would escape north to Bastogne. Sergeant James Kowalski volunteered to lead the decoy squad. "If someone's gonna die out here," he said through cracked lips, "better it buys someone else a chance." His team, posing as a German mobile artillery unit, led an entire panzer column on a 4-hour chase through icy switchbacks before detonating a hillside and burying themselves, and 20 enemy vehicles, under 2 tons of snow and stone. Granger's surviving squad finally reached the outskirts of Bastogne on January 8, 1945. Filthy, frozen, and dressed like their enemies, they were nearly shot by Allied sentries. Only Santiago's frantic shouting in English saved them. Of the original 22, only 8 made it back. No medals were given. Their actions remained classified for years, buried under the fog of war and political convenience. But their legacy endured elsewhere. Partisan legends told of ghost soldiers who spoke perfect German but fought with the fury of Allied angels. Children in Welsam grew up hearing tales of Father Lucien's miracle warriors. And in 1992, when the Iron Curtain fell and secret German war records became public, historians found confirmation. 10 separate reports of rogue SS units sabotaging German operations in the Ardennes. The truth had simply worn another man's uniform. One final note came decades later when a journalist, researching the Battle of the Bulge, stumbled upon Granger's diary in an attic in Kentucky. In it, the lieutenant had written, "We did not disappear. We adapted. We became their shadow. And in that shadow, we fought like hell." Today, near the outskirts of Welsam, a rusted helmet rests atop a stone with 22 names etched in silence. Locals call it the Ghost Rock. No flag flies over it. No nation claims the fallen. But to those who know the story, it marks the place where men became myths, fighting not for glory, but for each other, in the cold silence of the trees. The corridors of Bletchley Park echoed with the clatter of typewriters, the scratching of pencils, and the low hum of human brilliance under pressure. While history often remembers the likes of Alan Turing and the bomb machine, it forgets the women, particularly the clandestine section G9, a group of 7 female cryptanalysts whose contributions would rewrite the boundaries of intelligence work. They were never officially acknowledged, never decorated, and never allowed to tell their stories. But they cracked a code no one else could, one that revealed a Nazi plot to sabotage the very heart of the Allied war effort. The Enigma Sisterhood, as they came to be known only in declassified documents decades later, operated in a nondescript wing of Bletchley's Hut 6. At their head was Elise Harrington, a 28-year-old linguist fluent in 6 languages with a background in ancient Greek poetry and chess strategy. She had been recruited in early 1942 under the guise of clerical service, only to be swiftly redirected into the world of ciphers, patterns, and deception. G9's assignment was different from that of the male-dominated main decoding teams. They were tasked with identifying non-pattern transmissions, messages that seemed to resist decryption by the bomb machines and didn't follow typical Enigma rhythms. These rogue messages, dismissed by many as operational noise, struck Harrington as deliberate anomalies. Working tirelessly through late 1943, the group discovered that these transmissions were not German military but SS intelligence chatter, encrypted using a modified Enigma machine with an added rotor and a rotating plugboard, thought to be uncrackable. For months, the women of G9 combed through transcripts, listening for repetition not in letters but in rhythm, pauses, gaps, even the cadence of the telegraphists. Elise dubbed it the music of the machine. By early 1944, they succeeded. Using pattern recognition inspired by Bach's fugues, they unlocked what would become known internally as Code Silverglass. The messages detailed something terrifying, a secret operation called Drachenblut, a coordinated sabotage campaign against Allied scientific facilities in the UK and the United States. The final targets were the Manhattan Project sites in Los Alamos, Oak Ridge, and Hanford. The messages referenced high-level Nazi agents embedded in neutral countries, coordinating through Vatican diplomatic pouches, and using academic conferences as cover. Elise and her team knew they had to move fast. Yet, when they delivered their findings to the War Office, the men in suits scoffed. A woman-led team deciphering a phantom code wasn't something the brass wanted to believe. "This reads like fiction," one general remarked. Refusing to let their work vanish into bureaucracy, the sisterhood took matters into their own hands. Elise wrote directly to the Prime Minister. Her letter was intercepted by Stuart Menzies, head of MI6. After a closed-door review, Churchill himself allegedly ordered a black operation to verify and counter the threat. He gave it a single directive: let no saboteur reach the atom. 3 weeks later, the OSS and British SOE coordinated a joint sweep in Lisbon, Zurich, and Istanbul. 4 agents posing as diplomats were arrested. In New York, an Austrian physicist, deeply embedded in Columbia University, was quietly deported. No public charges were made. The story vanished into sealed files. Inside Bletchley, G9 was ordered to dismantle their station and rejoin standard duties. The women were forbidden from discussing what had happened, even with each other. Elise was reassigned to administrative cipher indexing. By war's end, the name Section G9 didn't appear in a single official record. Their files were buried so deep it would take until 1997 for a curious FOIA request to unearth a box labeled Project Verglss, confidential, never disclose. The sisterhood scattered after the war. Elise became a professor of classics in Cambridge. Margaret Thorne joined a literary society in Edinburgh. No one ever spoke of their work, until a BBC archivist, doing research for a wartime documentary, stumbled upon a letter written by Elise Harrington to her sister in 1946. It was heavily redacted, but one phrase remained intact. "We were the silence behind the code, the invisible hands that caught the serpent's tongue before it could strike." Today, a small plaque in Bletchley Park's Memorial Garden simply reads, "To those whose service was not spoken, but heard where it mattered most." The Enigma Sisterhood's names remain classified. But their legacy survives, not in medals or parades, but in the lives they saved from a war that reached even into the minds of men building the future's deadliest weapon. By the winter of 1942, Prague had become a city of hushed footsteps and watchful eyes. Nazi banners draped over Charles Bridge like funeral veils, and the Gestapo patrolled the cobbled streets with cold precision. Yet beneath this silence, something stirred. It was not armed rebellion or open defiance, but a subtler force, art, culture, and coded resistance whispered through the strains of music and the weight of poetry. This was the Prague Silence, an underground resistance movement that fought the Nazi occupation not with bullets, but with symphonies. At the center of it all was Jan Dvorak, a renowned conductor dismissed from the Prague Philharmonic for refusing to perform under the swastika. He had once been celebrated across Europe, even performing for President Beneš before the Munich Agreement shattered Czechoslovakia. After the German occupation, Jan vanished from public life. But he did not vanish entirely. Dvorak founded the Prague Silence in a wine cellar beneath a bombed-out opera house. It was more than a hiding place, it was a sanctuary for artists, students, professors, and musicians who believed that beauty could be a weapon. Their aim, to resist Nazi control by embedding secret messages into public performances, staging concerts that doubled as meetings, and using cultural gatherings to pass intelligence to the British Special Operations Executive, SOE. Their most audacious tool was music itself. With the help of cryptographers hiding within the Czech Postal Service, Dvorak developed a system where notes, rests, and tempo changes corresponded to letters and phrases in a hidden code. Each concert was a message. A rallentando might signal a German troop movement. A key change could mark a weapon's cache location. The resistance would distribute the sheet music to trusted allies, who deciphered the code and relayed it through diplomatic channels, or hidden radio broadcasts embedded within Czech classical programming. Their first major act of sabotage came during a public performance of Smetana's Má Vlast. Under the guise of a patriotic tribute, Dvorak and his ensemble included coded information about the schedule of German supply trains heading to the Eastern Front. Within a week, a resistance cell blew up a railway bridge outside Brno. The Nazis suspected sabotage but never imagined it came from a conductor's baton. As word spread among the oppressed, the Prague Silence became a symbol of defiance. Black market programs of their concerts were passed from hand to hand like sacred scripture. A single line of sheet music might hide entire paragraphs of intelligence. One surviving example, a 1943 arrangement of Dvorak's New World Symphony, contained the layout of a Gestapo detention facility scrawled in the margins by candlelight. But success brought danger. The Gestapo grew suspicious of the cultural revival sweeping Prague and began monitoring performances. Dvorak's closest allies, pianist Marta Hermanova and violinist Emil Vojtěch, were arrested in early 1944. Marta cracked under torture, revealing the existence of coded messages in music. Vojtěch died in custody, but not before swallowing a list of names sewn into the lining of his jacket. To preserve the movement, Dvorak made a desperate gamble. He arranged a performance of Wagner's Götterdämmerung, a piece beloved by Nazi elites. At the climax of the concert, the orchestra deliberately botched the final movement, playing a hidden melody woven with information about the Nazi chemical weapons depot near Plzeň. The performance was broadcast live across Germany. Within days, the SOE launched a targeted bombing raid that destroyed the depot and killed a visiting Nazi scientist rumored to be working on V weapons. It was a brilliant stroke, and a death sentence. Within a week, the Nazis descended on the opera house. Dvorak was captured and publicly executed in Prague's Old Town Square, forced to conduct his own orchestra one last time. His final piece, a haunting arrangement of Chopin's Funeral March, performed with slow, deliberate defiance. The entire ensemble was arrested. Some were shot. Others were sent to their Scienstadt. The Prague silence was crushed, or so it seemed. What the Nazis didn't know was that Dvorak had prepared a legacy. Before his capture, he entrusted a satchel of music to a child prodigy named Hanna Adlerova, only 13 years old. Hidden in her cello case was the last encoded symphony, a full archive of names, safehouses, contact methods, and SOE communication codes. Hanna smuggled it through occupied territory into Switzerland with the help of a Catholic priest and a corrupt border guard who had once studied under Dvorak. That satchel reached London in June 1944. The information inside prevented at least 3 major Gestapo raids, saved dozens of resistance leaders across Eastern Europe, and confirmed the location of 2 more chemical depots that were later neutralized. After the war, Hanna testified at the Nuremberg trials under protection from the British government. She lived the rest of her life in Tel Aviv, never performing again. But each year on January 8, the date of Dvorak's execution, she would play a single piece from memory. The Chopin March, soft and slow, beneath an open window. Today, little remains of the Prague silence. The original opera house is now a hotel. Most of the members died unknown and unhonored. But in 2012, a Czech historian rediscovered a bundle of sheet music inside a false wall in a Prague basement. In the margins were annotations in an archaic cipher, decoded to reveal movements of resistance fighters, locations of buried weapons, and the last known safehouse of Father Kral, the priest who helped Hanna escape. The documents now reside in the Czech National Archive under the name Operation Echo. Scholars continue to unravel the layers of hidden communication. For a movement based on silence, the echoes have never truly stopped. Hundreds of miles from the Japanese mainland, adrift in the vast Pacific, lies a speck of coral and concrete called Minami-Tori-shima, South Bird Island. Flat, isolated, and strategically invisible, it had long been dismissed by Allied planners as irrelevant. But in February 1945, a classified operation led by the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet discovered that the Emperor's final secret was hidden there, a radar outpost not only guiding kamikaze attacks but protecting a covert weapons research station tied to the Nazi V-2 rocket program. The ensuing battle would never appear in official records. No medals were awarded. Survivors were told never to speak of it. This was the forgotten siege of Emperor's Last Island. Minami-Tori-shima had once housed a simple weather station. But under the coordination of General Ushijima, and with German technical assistance smuggled in through submarine U-234, the Japanese Imperial Navy transformed it into something far more lethal. Satellite photos, primitive but telling, revealed suspicious construction near the lagoon, reinforced bunkers, unusually large antenna arrays, and a runway too short for bombers but perfect for courier planes. Naval intelligence grew alarmed when decrypted messages from the Japanese Navy referenced Operation Okiri, a last-line plan to deploy new forms of guided weaponry should the homeland face invasion. A reconnaissance Catalina flying boat, scouting the area, vanished without a trace. That was enough for Admiral Raymond Spruance to authorize Task Force 38 to investigate and, if necessary, neutralize the island. The assault force, disguised as a standard reconnaissance mission, included a small team of Marines from the 6th Division, led by Captain Alan Reyes. He was a veteran of Tarawa and Guadalcanal, and weary of suicidal scouting, but the orders were clear: land, confirm enemy presence, extract or eliminate. What they found was far worse than expected. On the 3rd day of surveillance, Reyes's team intercepted a coded radio burst. With the help of embedded OSS tech specialist Dana Cho, they triangulated the source to a domed structure surrounded by thick concrete and camouflaged netting. When they approached under cover of night, the building erupted in automatic fire. Reyes lost 2 men before they pulled back, but Cho had captured enough footage to confirm what the dome contained, an array of radar equipment far more advanced than what had been seen elsewhere in the Pacific, possibly reverse-engineered from German designs. Inside documents recovered from a downed scout plane showed an unexpected connection: blueprints bearing the seal of Heereswaffenamt, the Nazi Army Weapons Office. Operation Okiri, it turned out, wasn't just about radar. The island was a hub for experimental weapons research, a joint venture between Imperial Japan and fleeing German scientists. Among the records was the chilling name Project Kirishima, AV-2, derived missile adapted for naval deployment, possibly with biological payloads. Spruance immediately changed the mission parameters. Minami-Tori-shima was now a priority target. Over the next 6 days, the island was subjected to relentless bombardment. Yet Japanese resistance did not break. The defenders, hand-picked, fanatically loyal to the emperor, and possibly aware of the stakes, fought with an intensity Reyes would later describe as inhuman. They refused to retreat, refused to die. Even mortally wounded soldiers continued to fire from trenches filled with sea water and blood. The siege's turning point came not from firepower but from intelligence. Cho, braving sniper fire, infiltrated the comms bunker and tapped into the radar feed. What she uncovered sent shockwaves through the fleet. Minami-Tori-shima was coordinating long-range kamikaze strikes using radar guidance to navigate through cloud cover, a technology thought beyond Japan's reach. Worse, intercepted transmissions suggested a strike was inbound toward the U.S. carriers anchored at Ulithi Atoll. With no time to spare, Reyes's remaining Marines launched a final assault on the central dome. They used flamethrowers and satchel charges to break through the defenses. Inside, they found not only the radar array but a laboratory filled with petri dishes, German-language notebooks, and sealed metal canisters with biohazard markings. One canister had already been loaded onto a small float plane hidden beneath camouflage netting. According to Cho's later testimony, the contents matched samples of weaponized typhus, intended to be dispersed over American ships or potentially Hawaii in a final act of desperation. The float plane was destroyed moments before it could launch. The canisters were sealed and transported to a naval lab in Guam, then quietly taken to a facility later known as Fort Detrick. Nothing more was heard of Project Kirishima. The few German scientists captured were quietly absorbed into American intelligence operations through Project Paperclip. Their testimonies were classified. Of the original Marine landing party, only 9 returned. Captain Reyes died from shrapnel injuries 2 days after extraction. Dana Cho disappeared from the public eye, her work buried under decades of secrecy. It wasn't until a 1983 FOIA request, followed by a congressional inquiry into unreported Pacific operations, that fragments of Minami-Tori-shima's story surfaced. The island today is uninhabited. A Japanese weather station operates there once more, its pristine towers standing atop layers of ash and blood. No memorial exists for those who died in the siege. No official recognition marks what was nearly the Pacific's first act of biological warfare. But in the private archive of a retired naval historian, there is a reel of damaged footage, Cho's camera, salvaged from the lagoon. It shows the island's horizon silhouetted against the setting sun, the dome in flames, and a single Marine planting a tattered American flag into coral sand. In the background, a faint voice can be heard over the radio, whispering the code phrase that ended the battle. Asterisk, the nest is burned. The egg is broken. Asterisk. They found the journal in the crumbling ruins of a Berlin apartment block in 1986, hidden behind loose bricks in a cellar wall. Bound in cracked black leather, its pages yellowed and water-stained, the writing inside was elegant, meticulous, and terrifying in its honesty. It was the private account of Franz Becker, a mid-level SS officer who served in occupied Poland and later in Dachau. What made his journal remarkable was not his rank or posting, it was his transformation. For within those pages lay the confession of a man who turned against everything he once believed in, risking everything to leak evidence of the Holocaust to the Allies. Franz Becker was born in Dresden in 1909, the son of a schoolmaster and a devout Lutheran mother. He studied philosophy and history at Heidelberg before joining the SS in 1935. At first, he was an idealist. Like many of his generation, he had been seduced by the rhetoric of national renewal, the myth of betrayal after Versailles, the promise of order in a world turned chaotic. He believed in discipline, in Germany's right to rise again. In 1941, Becker was transferred to Krakow as an administrative officer. There, his duties included reviewing requisition orders, rail schedules, and camp personnel files. It was all paper, no blood, no screams. He told himself this as the trains kept coming, as the lists grew longer, and the columns of names crossed his desk. At first, he ignored the rumors. Jews were being relocated, not murdered. There were work camps, not death camps. But doubt crept in like frost under a closed door. What shattered his illusions was a visit to Belzec in the spring of 1942. Becker accompanied a superior officer, Obersturmbannführer Kramer, on a routine inspection. What he saw that day haunted him for the rest of his life. The pits, the bulldozers, the smoke, the silence. Hell has no fire, he wrote that night. Only ash, and the sound of children who no longer cry. From that moment, Becker began to change. He pretended nothing had shifted. He filed his reports, attended officer parties, nodded during speeches. But in secret, he began documenting everything. He copied transport records, photographed camp blueprints, and kept names of men who gave the orders, who built the machinery of murder. He hid these documents in safe houses and under floorboards, writing in his journal every night with the obsessive discipline of a man trying to atone. In early 1943, Becker made contact with Father Leopold Renner, a Catholic priest involved in the Polish underground. Through him, Becker's information reached the Vatican and, eventually, British intelligence. So he code-named the channel Pilgrim. Few in London knew that the source was a Nazi officer. But the data was undeniable. Timelines of deportations, internal communications, diagrams of gas chambers. Pilgrim's intelligence helped Allied leaders confirm the industrial scale of the final solution. Despite multiple purges and arrests within the SS, Becker remained undetected. His colleagues described him as quiet, efficient, loyal. In his journal, however, he wrote of his increasing despair. "I am complicit," he confessed. "No matter how many papers I pass, it cannot bring back the boy I saw trying to hold his sister's hand before the gate swallowed them." In April 1944, Becker was reassigned to Dachau. There, his proximity to key personnel gave him access to medical experimentation records, photographs, and internal memos that would later serve as evidence at the Nuremberg trials. It was also in Dachau that he met his undoing. A fellow officer, suspicious of Becker's frequent private meetings with civilian clerks, reported him to the Sicherheitsdienst. A raid on his quarters turned up nothing. Becker had anticipated it. But he was arrested anyway, held under disciplinary suspicion. While detained, he was tortured, though never formally charged. In July 1944, he escaped during a bombing raid and vanished into the ruins of Berlin. The journal ends in March 1945, just weeks before the Soviet advance. The final entry reads, "The city burns above me. Each building a coffin, each street a grave. If this book survives, let it speak for those I could not save. I am not a hero. I am the echo of a scream that should never have been necessary." Franz Becker was never found. Some believe he died during the Battle of Berlin. Others claim he escaped under false papers and fled west. No official record of his death exists. But after the war, several documents provided anonymously to Allied prosecutors bore the same handwriting as the journal. One such packet included full rosters of SS doctors involved in human experimentation, many of whom were later convicted at Nuremberg. In 1991, a Berlin museum quietly acquired the journal. At first, they debated its authenticity. But forensic analysis confirmed its age, and handwriting experts linked it to surviving personnel files. It was real. It now resides in a sealed glass case at the German Resistance Memorial Center, open to scholars by appointment. Visitors often pause longest at the final page, where Becker pasted a photo, torn, faded, and burnt at the edges. It shows two children, a boy and a girl, holding hands in a muddy street, their eyes wide and uncomprehending. No one knows who they were. Only that someone remembered them, when the world did not. Buried under decades of secrecy, their story was erased, their names unspoken. But in the shadows of war, they became something more than soldiers, phantoms of vengeance, men without a country, fighting in a uniform not their own. Now, the silence breaks, and the ghosts return.